Name for me any of those parts of the meninges. Now this, Abdul Malik, I think you can give us one. Remember we talked about the outer membrane, the very, very inner membrane, then there is a space in between. Yes, Abdul Malik. Abdul Malik, I hope you hear me.
Yes, sir.
Any part of the meninges that we talked about last time?
Dura Mater.
Right. We talked about the Dura Mater. And if you remember very well, we said that the Dura Mater is the tough outer membrane which covers the brain. So it is the very, very outermost membrane. It is tough, and so it protects the membrane, the brain. Now I want somebody to name for us the innermost, the very, very innermost part of the meninges. The very, very innermost. Fatuma, I think you can give us the answer to that. If you can hear me, Fatuma. The very innermost part of the brain. Yes, Fatuma. Yeah, Fatuma seems to be still thinking. Baja.
Pia Mater.
Yes, Baja. Once more. Yes, Baja, I can't hear you.
The Pia Mater.
Mater, correct. So the pia mater is the innermost membrane that covers the brain, the very, very innermost of the meninges. Okay, now I say there is a space in between the dura mater and the pia mater. There is a narrow space. So I want somebody to tell us the name of that narrow space. So I think Anab can give us the answer to that. Anab, name for us the narrow space between the dura mater and the pia mater. Yes, Anab, if you can hear me. Anab, yes, Anab. Anab, name the narrow space between the dura mater and the pia mater. Anab seems to be thinking. Let me push on the question to Jamal. Jamal, if you can hear me. The space between the mater and the pia mater. Jamal, are you there?
Yeah.
Can you name the space between the dura mater and the pia mater?
Arachnoid.
Correct. It's called arachnoid layer in the dura mater and the pia mater. That is very correct. Now, another question, we said that the arachnoid layer is filled with a certain fluid. There is a fluid between the dura mater and the pia mater, and that fluid is actually in the arachnoid layer. So somebody to name for us this fluid and to tell us its function. Fatuma. Name the fluid and then give us its function, please. Fatuma, name the fluid. Fatuma, I can't hear you. Fatuma, I don't know why I can't hear you. Fatuma is not, I'm not getting actually.
Mr. Njoga, I have enabled Fatuma's microphone so she can speak unless there is a problem with the device. Every student that's being asked a question, I'm enabling your mic so that you can speak to the teacher. Feel free.
Okay. Fatuma seems to be having a technical challenge there. But let me ask another student, Ahmed. I want you to tell us the fluid that is found in the arachnoid layer. There is a fluid there found in the arachnoid layer. So tell us the name of the fluid and its function. Yes, Ahmed. Yes, Ahmed. Oh, okay. Now we talked about this fluid, and we said that in the arachnoid layer there is a fluid, and the fluid is called cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid. Let me write it there for you. So we talked about cerebrospinal fluid. Now that fluid provides nutrients and also oxygen to the brain cells. Fluid. I hope you have gotten that. Now up to there, I want us now to jump and and now I want to just remind you that we also talked about the regions of the brain, and we talked about the forebrain, the midbrain, and also the hindbrain. Now, the forebrain, we have the cerebrum, the hypothalamus, thalamus, and also the pituitary gland. The midbrain, we said, is just a connecting stop. It connects the forebrain and the hindbrain. Then the hindbrain, we said, consists of the cerebellum and also the medulla oblongata. Now, very fast, I want us to go through to remind ourselves about the functions of these parts. We talked about cerebrum. So cerebrum, we say it controls learning, memory, thinking, and it's also very important when it comes to hearing. Then we also talked about thalamus, and we said that thalamus is actually a relay center. A relay center, if you can remember that. A relay center, it means it actually sends information to different parts of the brain. And it also contains receptors for pain and pleasure. Then we also talked about, another part we talked about is the hypothalamus, which is actually below the thalamus. The hypothalamus, we say that it controls sleep, appetite, and it also controls body temperature, and also very important when it comes to osmoregulation. We also talked about pituitary gland, which is actually controls other endocrine glands, mainly production of hormones. Then we also mentioned the cerebellum, and we said that it controls body balance and posture. Then medulla oblongata, we said it controls controls body blood pressure, vasoconstriction, vasodilation, and we also said that the medulla oblongata also controls vomiting. Now, having said that, now today I want us to talk about the spinal cord. The spinal cord is just another component of the CNS apart from the brain. Remember, we have two components, the brain and the spinal cord. And the spinal cord, maybe you might be asking yourself, what is this thing called spinal cord? The spinal cord is just an extension. It is an extension of the brain. From the back of the brain, there is that extension which extends all the way inside our vertebral column, actually up to the lumbar region or the lumbar part. So this delicate structure runs inside our vertebral column, and that is actually to provide it with the protection. Now I want to draw a diagram there of the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is a structure which looks like this. Yeah, then this one goes all the way to there. Then, so we have this part here, this part here, this part, the whole of this. This is called gray matter. Gray matter. Gray matter. Then we have this other side here. This other part. That is the white matter. The white matter. Then we also then there is a central canal here. It's a central canal. A canal means it is an opening. This one here, right at the center. Now, the central canal is actually filled with what we call cerebrospinal fluid. That same fluid that I talked about earlier. Cerebrospinal fluid fills up this canal. And this fluid here performs, again, the same function it was performing in the brain. That is providing nutrients and also oxygen to the spinal cord. The fluid is called cerebrospinal fluid. So the central canal is filled with that kind of fluid. Then there is this part here. So the whole of this is the gray matter. The whole of it is the gray matter. Then this other part is white matter, white matter. Then this, you can see there is some extension here like a root. This is called the ventral horn, ventral horn, ventral horn. Then the other side, which is up here, is the dorsal horn. So there is the ventral horn, which is this, and then there is the dorsal horn on the upper end, on the upper side. And then this part we have said is the white matter, and then this is the gray matter. All of it is called the gray matter. Yeah, then the membrane here is also called meninges. The spinal cord is also enclosed by the meninges, and the meninges protects the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is protected in two ways. One, the vertebral column. The vertebral column provides protection to the spinal cord. Two, the meninges. The meninges also protects the spinal cord. Yes, so these are the main parts of what we call the spinal cord. And so let me draw another. This is the spinal cord. Then like that. So we have neurons coming in and neurons leaving. So we have the sensory neuron enters like that. So the sensory neuron, as you can see, it enters through the dorsal side or through the dorsal horn. This one here. Remember, the sensory neuron, its cell body is outside, like that, outside of the CNS. Then there is an intermediate neuron. There we have dendrites. Then there is an intermediate neuron. Then we have the motor neuron. The motor neuron, its cell body is inside there, inside the CNS. And then this is the central canal. Yeah, so as you can see what I've indicated there, we have the dendrites. The motor neuron, as its dendrites are inside here. You can see we have dendrites of these neurons inside the gray matter. The dendrites of the neurons are inside the gray matter. And actually that is where the names come from. That is why it is called the gray matter. And then on the other part here, we have the axons with the myelin sheaths, and this side here is the white matter. So it is called white matter because it consists mainly of the myelin sheaths of the neurons. This part here is the gray matter because it consists of the dendrites of the neurons. Yeah, so that is just that, what we call the spinal cord. So this one shows the spinal cord with the neurons entering and the neurons leaving. The sensory neuron and the motor neuron. Yeah, so the sensory neuron, the cell body is outside. The motor neuron, the cell body is inside. You can see that very clearly. Then there is another neuron here, which is in the, actually as a bridge, bridging or connecting the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. So this one is the intermediate neuron. So if an impulse comes, it comes like that, it passes, then it goes all the way to the effectors. We are going to talk about that one in details later on. Yeah, so that is, to be brief, that is about the spinal cord. And this spinal cord, now it plays two major functions. One, it acts as a reflex center that coordinates all the spinal reflexes. It coordinates spinal reflexes. We are going to talk about reflex, so you'll know what they are. Then it also provides conduction routes. Two, and from the brain. Actually, it provides a two-way conduction to and from the brain. Information goes to the brain and it also leaves the brain. So the spinal cord actually helps to provide the route for information to the brain, and then it leaves the brain. Remember, we have just said that the spinal cord is an extension of the brain that runs all the way to our lumbar region. So it means it can enable information to reach the brain through impulses, neurons. Then it can also enable such information to leave the brain, of course, through impulses in the neuron. Yeah, so that is about the neuron, about the spinal cord. And now I want us to move now and talk about what we call reflex action. Reflex action. So the first thing is to understand what a reflex action is. The first thing is to understand what a reflex action. So a reflex action is a rapid automatic response to a particular stimulus. I will repeat that. It is a rapid automatic response to a certain stimulus. And I want to give you this example. I know many a times, most of you have found yourself responding rapidly, actually, even involuntarily, without you knowing. For example, you step on a sharp pin. You actually withdraw your legs before even knowing. If, for example, you touch a hot sufuria, you just find yourself, you are withdrawing your hand. So that is something which is very rapid and automatic, involuntary. That means it happens very fast, and then it is actually, you don't even control it. You just find it has happened. Something trying to get inside your eyes. If, for example, some particle, you just find you have blinked your eyes. That is something you don't control, involuntary. So such responses actually are called reflex action. And for this reflex action to occur, several things are involved here. And we are simply going to talk about what we have been learning. So a reflex action involves things like, one, there must be a stimulus. A stimulus is what is causing that response. Is what is causing, what is making you to withdraw your hand, for example. Is it a hot object? Is it fire? Or is it a sharp pin? If it is a sharp pin, then that is the stimulus. If it is a hot sufuria, then heat or high temperature there is the stimulus. If it is pain, then that is the stimulus. So there must be a stimulus. Then there must be the receptor to receive or to detect. Then there must be the neurons involved. Neurons must be involved. Then effectors are also involved. So there is a certain pathway which is followed by an impulse during this reflex action. And I want to use this example of touching a hot object. Now, your hand touches a hot object. So the hot object is the stimulus. Then there is the sensory neuron just there in your hand. First of all, there is the receptor, there is thermoreceptor. So there is a thermoreceptors which will detect and then produce impulses. Then there is the sensory neuron that will now carry that impulse from the point of in contact with the hot object to the CNS. So there is the sensory neuron. So let me go back to our whiteboard. So there is this, your hand is there. Your hand is touching a hot flame there. So we are saying there is a receptor here, which will take information to the CNS. This is actually what we call the sensory receptor, the sensory neuron. Then in the CNS, it will enter. So it will enter there. That one seems not to be very clear. So your hand is down there. You have touched something hot. So the information must be taken to the CNS. That is the sensory neuron. In the CNS, there is that neuron, which is actually acting as a bridge between the two neurons. Then there is the motor neuron leaving. Then the motor neuron will come right up to there, which is your bicep muscle. Then you withdraw your hand. Yes. So here is actually a path here. What I wanted to explain here is a path which is going to be followed by this neuron. So here is the earth object. So there is the thermoreceptor on your hand. Then there is the neuron here, which is the sensory neuron. So the thermoreceptor will produce impulses. CNS. Then in the CNS, there is a neuron here, which is in the middle here. So this is the sensory, this is the sensory. Then this is the intermediate or relay. Then there is another neuron here, which begins from there. It carries the impulse. So the impulse comes, then it crosses to this neuron through a synapse. I said there is a gap here between one neuron and the other one. There is always a gap, and the gap is called synapse. We will discuss this one later. Synapse. So it crosses this synapse into the relay, then it crosses another synapse, then it comes to the motor neuron. From the motor neuron, now it goes to the effectors. So it is coming this way. So it comes to the effectors. In this case, our effector is this bicep muscle. This is the muscle called the bicep. So once the bicep muscles receive the impulse, the bicep muscles will now contract. And when this muscle contracts, then it actually pulls upwards your hand, and then you are able to withdraw your hand from the object. So the whole of this part is what we call a reflex arc. A reflex arc. So reflex arc is the part followed by a neuron during a reflex action. So our part, then it ends here. This is where it ends. So the whole of this pathway is what we call the reflex arc. The path which is going to be followed by an impulse during a reflex action. Yes. So that is it. So you need to understand this. You need to understand what happens. It might be a hot object. It might be a sharp pin. The pathway is the same. The only difference is now the receptor here. If it is something sharp, then we talked about the pain receptors, which will receive impulses here. If it is something hot, then we talk about thermoreceptors, which will receive then generate impulses, which will now be transmitted through what we call the reflex arc. I hope that is clear. And up to there, I want to mention types of reflex action types. So we have two main types of reflex action. One is what we call the simple reflex action. Then the other one is called conditioned reflex action. Now, what is the difference between the two? Now, what I've talked about here, this one is a very good example of a simple reflex action, an automatic, a rapid response to a certain stimulus. This one here, simple, a very good example of a simple reflex. So this is when somebody touches a hot object. The other example is when somebody touches a sharp pin. Assume a pin is here, a sharp pin. That is another very good example of simple reflex action. Yes. Then condition. Now there is a difference here between simple and conditioned. Simple is the one which is automatic, very rapid response to a stimuli. Then conditioned is a kind of reflex action which is normally brought about through learning and memory. So it means conditioned reflex is something which you must learn. For it to happen, for you to respond, you must learn. That is conditioned reflex action. And I want to give this example. Seeing our time is also running out, we will dwell much on this next time. But let me just mention an example of a conditioned reflex action. Assume you have been feeding some dogs. So every time you want to give the dogs some food, there will reach a time when you ring the bell, the dogs will know there is food. That is quite obvious. So with the time, the dogs learn to associate the ringing of the bell and the food. So if the dogs used to salivate, whenever they know they are going to eat, they salivate. So when they hear the bell, they salivate because they know there is food. So they begin to salivate because they know there is food available. They are going to eat. So they begin to salivate. So the dogs learn to associate the ringing of the bell and the food. I hope that is quite clear. We will dwell on that much later on because I can see our time is actually up. So I hope you have the notes, but I want you to be reading thoroughly what we have talked about. If we discuss something, when we meet next time, please